Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would talk about a topic that people are either going to love or they're going to hate. It might be unpopular, and I'm not even making this video to tell you specifically how to train. I'm not making this video to justify anything in my own personal training or anything else. I'm making this video just so that people understand the topic of adding isolation movements to compound movements isn't actually as supported in the scientific literature as a lot of people might feel based upon real world experience and anecdote and tradition and everything else. Now, what I'm going to say is that if you want to do curls and tricep extensions and all of that because you feel that you get a benefit from it, I'm not going to tell you to quit doing those. Because you know what? Just because something's not really well documented in the scientific literature, there isn't evidence for it, doesn't mean that there might not be some benefits. All right, you need to understand that. In some cases, even psychological. In other words, if you just feel like your arms are going to grow more, maybe you will train harder overall with arm stuff, including even the big compound movements, and they might grow more. You know what? I'm not going to tell you to stop doing something that you feel is benefiting you and doesn't seem to be causing you any harm. And I think that's a fair statement to make. But I decided to look back into this further because I kind of concluded based upon my own experience. You know, I always get people who are like, Jason, you don't have the biggest arms, your arms, you need to do this, you need to do that. And they haven't been watching my channels for all these years, or they would know arms are the only thing I ever really isolate. I don't do isolation work very, very rarely, other than until very recently, occasionally some hamstring stuff. I have very rarely historically isolate anything but arms. And I have done enormous amounts of really strict curling, strict incline curls, strict tricep extensions of various types over the years while I've been on here. In fact, I've done whole workouts to where I'm like, hey guys, twice a week for this entire year, I've done incline curls and tricep extensions at the end of my other workouts. So, you know, they're getting multiple sets, obviously, of very strict isolation movements in my arms. And then people would always be like, well, I think your arms are lagging a little bit. But it's like the only muscles that lag are the ones that I actually have been isolating. And over time, that's led me to the conclusion of isolation work doesn't really do that much. We all want to feel like, hey, you know, you can get a lot of growth from doing these isolation movements. And in some cases that works. We've got novice studies that look at it and show, yeah, bicep curls produce almost as much muscle growth as lat pull downs do. If you take a novice and you have them do just one or the other, they get just about the same. But the guys who do the lat pull downs get more back growth too. They both grow the arms equally, with the slight, sometimes a slight advantage to the compound movement, right? Now, the irony there is that the lat pull down is not a particularly good bicep movement as far as people think of compound movements. According to the data, it seems to be just as good as curls. So what do you do? But the thing is, when I've started looking for more research, because I'm like, you know what, I know there's data showing that there's a couple of studies floating around that show that doing curls with lat pull downs doesn't increase their size. All right, it doesn't do anything. So I've kind of looked and started digging, and I've asked around other people if they can produce studies. I started doing Google searches for people who've looked at this to see if maybe those studies are wrong. Because you know what? You can look at two studies on something, and two studies can say one thing, and the evidence isn't that good. And then you find that there's 3 or 4 studies that say the exact opposite, that all have very stronger evidence. So we don't ever base what we do off of a single study. That's absurd. We should never do that. So I started looking around, and here's the problem. There have only been a handful of studies ever done looking at this. There have only been a handful of studies, and you know what they have found universally? That if people do enough volume for their experience level on a compound movement, adding isolation movements doesn't seem to cause any extra muscle growth. Now people are going to be like, what do you mean that's not possible? I do this and that, my arms grow. Well, that might not be what's making your arms grow. You just think it is. And one of the studies, and I'll flip some studies and stuff through here so that you guys get an idea of what I'm talking about. But what you can see from the one there, and that's just the abstract. And what I've done here, guys, I'm just putting abstracts in the screenshots of my videos because that's not against YouTube's rules in any way. What I have found is that linking studies below linking actual studies has occasionally gotten me in trouble when people have reported it, people who hate me and stuff. It's gotten me temporary strikes on YouTube that I've had to appeal and things. I've always got to successfully appeal. It's just I don't want to take the risk when it's a gray area. It's a gray area. Specifically saying, hey, go check this website out and linking it inside of a YouTube video is technically a violation of YouTube's policy. So just so that people understand that it seems to include scientific studies if that was the entire purpose of making your video. So I can't do that anymore. But the reality is you guys can see enough keywords here to go Google these yourself. But when you look at this one, this is the untrained one. And when you look further into the study, what did they do? They took a group of guys and had them bench press and do lat pull downs in one group. And they took another group, and these are all untrained people, and they had them do the same exercises, but they had them do a curl and a tricep extension on a machine. And they tracked them over a number of weeks. And what they concluded at the end, they didn't gain any extra muscle or strength from adding the isolation movement. Now, a lot of people are like, wow, really? Lat pull downs add just as much size as adding a curl does to your biceps? Yeah, in a novice. Now, the weakness of this study is that people will say, well, they're untrained. Everything makes them grow, and it was just easy to reach their stuff with the compound movements. So what about trained people? Well, these same people later did another study with people who they required to have at least 2 years of training experience. 2 years, all healthy young men. Their average age is 29. And they mandated in this study that training they did had to include compound and isolation movements for the body parts they were going to study later. So these people had previous training experience doing these things. And they put them on a program they wrote for them, and it looks almost like a bodybuilder split, almost like a chest back, each done twice a week, like a total bro split. A bunch of free weights plus machines plus cables, and they had one group do these multiple sets, and I want to say it's something like 10 to 12 sets for their chest, 10 to 12 sets for their back. Typical bro training, right? They did that with group 1, and then group 2 they added in 2 types of curls and 2 types of tricep extensions. So this is a high volume bodybuilder split. You know what they found? The same thing in these trained people running a high volume bro split, typical bodybuilder looking type split just for the upper body. They found that the group that did the curls and tricep extensions didn't gain any more muscle or strength in their arms than the guys who just did the compounds, because they were doing enough volume on the big compounds that they maximized their arm growth. Their arms grew. Both groups, their arms actually grew. And that's the take home there. Their arms grew in both groups. And adding the curls and the tricep extensions didn't seem to cause the second group to gain a single drop more muscle in their arms, or even direct strength. When they tested their maxes on like a machine, so their arm was locked in to test their max bicep strength and max tricep strength, they saw no strength improvements either. They gained a maximum strength from the lat pull downs and the rows and the pressing in their triceps and biceps. So that was 2 big studies. And then someone else who was trying to research just wrote a blog on it, and they had referenced a study that I can't get the links to work, and I can't find it. Maybe one of you could find it for me. But the same sort of study was done on a bunch of college basketball players. So these are now relatively elite athletes, because you get a scholarship to college, you've got above average athletic genetics. So then we have a third type of group, actual real athletes. So we have untrained, then we have trained, and then we have actual athletes. A study was done on them, and they found the same thing, that adding isolation movements, if a fair amount of volume was done on compounds, didn't cause extra muscle growth or strength in the isolated muscles. So when we look at stuff like this, the take home has got to be, how much is this stuff really doing? Because truth be told, you guys have seen the same thing with me. My arms only grow based upon how well I'm doing on my compound movements. And all the curls and tricep extensions in the world don't do anything for me. I'm just not genetically gifted in the arms. I don't have tiny arms. I think people have now seen the stuff in the tank tops put up on Instagram and everything to realize I don't have tiny arms. They're not as small as you guys think they are when you see me in the t-shirt in proportion. But they're not quite balanced with the rest of my torso, right? They're not balanced. And I have been isolating arms for years. I've been doing the fluff for my arms and just doing the big strength training for everything else. the arms still lag. In other words, even for me, all these isolation movements haven't done anything. They haven't done anything to help me. And it's interesting because the scientific data seems to confirm exactly what everyone has observed in me over the years. It's just interesting. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.